core was a different story. Next, I'd combine the sticky thread with some steel thread to get the benefits of both. Another product of my experimentation, and as a bonus, it adopted the same immunities I had, so it wouldn't get burned up. Checkmate. I know I sneered at you earlier, but you were probably sneering at me, too.
Let's call it even. You're free to hate me for this if you like.
I'm up next, right? Ifrit, in a panic, struggled to free himself.
I expected that. But my sticky steel thread was never going to let him.
I took my sweet time, casually approaching.
It was time to land the final strike.
On Ifrit, the monster that had probably taken Shizu's body over.
No need for too much haste.
I walked up to this flailing creature, who was trying to throw every attack he could to stop me.
Sadly for him, flames didn't work on me. Then.
Use unique skill predator? Yes.
No. That'll be a big ol' yes, please. A flash of bright light covered the area, then suddenly vanished. All that was left was a lone old woman and me. Was this a dream? My mother's hand, cold.
Her cold eyes, gazing at me. A warm smile and a pile of pure white ash.
All these memories did was torment me. I didn't want to remember them. But that was the path I walked.
If I hadn't run into the hero, I doubt my soul could ever have been saved.
But I was too awkward, too unskilled, to wind up like her.
With so many people relying on me, too.
It was just that. It had been several years since I'd retired from the adventurer life.
I was a full-fledged teacher, leading the next generation of our trade as I helped out the society with its work. The Society of Adventurers, a group that crossed borders and had grown beyond the control of any single government, had built its headquarters in the Kingdom of Inglesia.
I was no longer an adventurer, but if there was anything I could do for them, I wanted to help them with it.
It had been the society, after all, that had given me a home of sorts when I had nowhere else to go. There, I had a chance to teach a number of talented students.
A young man with eyes that beamed with complete purity.
A girl, her gaze tinged with hopelessness.
More otherworlders, I assumed, just like me.
The two of them were exact opposites in so many ways. Yuki was a bright, optimistic boy, while Hinata was insular and reserved, as if she carried all the darkness in the world with her.
Bandits had attacked her when she came here. At the time, I had thought that she would warm up and come around as the days passed.
The bandits met their fates at the hands of some other assailant, which saved Hinata's life, but I'm sure the incident must have scarred her.
I saw a bit of myself in the girl, after all. I had an affinity for her. It was apparently one-sided. "Thank you for everything you've taught me," she said. "There is nothing else I can learn from you. I doubt we will meet again." Then she turned around and left.
I thought it might have been best to chase after her, but I couldn't will myself to leave town. The society was building a new shared assistance program with Inglesia, a new organizational structure originally proposed by Yuki. As a former hero, I was put in the position of representing the society in the requisite negotiations.
It was something I wanted to see succeed, considering how it would define the society's future direction.
So in the end, all I could do was see her off. "If you ever get lost," I called to her, "I want you to rely on me." After agonizing over it, I decided to support Yuki over Hinata. The girl had walked a similar path to mine, but she was always far more strong-willed than I was.
I figured that I should believe in her.
That her iron will could clear the darkness in her soul and transform her into a great woman.
It was no great surprise when I learned, a mere few years later, that she had risen to an important position in the church.
I felt a little proud, a little lonely, and just a tad anxious. Hinata isn't feeling lonesome, is she? Is she doing all right with her life? The questions overwhelmed me, but I figured I had no right to ask them.
I once had the chance to grasp her hand, and I had refused it. All I could do was pray for Hinata's continued safety.
Yuki, on the other hand, was far more dynamic.
It was Yuki who built the current system for the Society of Adventurers, now renamed the Free Guild.
Thanks to him, the guild was able to build a successful cooperative relationship with nations across the world. He had forged new treaties with governments, earning the guild positions in their topmost of councils.
His efforts had made the organization more powerful than ever. I should have expected nothing less. Until then, every nation had been focused solely on protecting its own borders. When the Free Guild began taking on monster dispatch duties, it lightened the loads of every other government in the world. And that wasn't all.
Adventurers, people who traveled the world, never beholden to any single country, were obligated to file reports on their journeys.
The Free Guild then collated these reports to gain a grasp of how monsters were distributed worldwide.
Danger levels were assigned to every region, allowing people to travel in relative peace.
The system had one other major effect. Knowing where and when to expect monsters made it possible to quickly detect anomalies, letting people discover and report on monsters not seen before or eliminate hordes in short order if they grew too numerous.
Whenever a monster that normally didn't appear in a certain region suddenly menaced a nearby town, the guild was also obliged to send an expeditionary force to figure out the cause. Getting to the root of it early on let the guild and local governments assemble a dispatch corps far more efficiently than before.
Having this kind of organization made people's lives both safer and more comfortable.
Mankind found itself expanding its cities, and the overall population has grown rapidly in recent years.
The institution of rankings assigned to monsters did much to reduce the number of deaths as well.
For someone charged with training new recruits, nothing could have made me happier.
Thanks to Yuki, the Free Guild was now an organization that neither the nations of the world nor its people could do without. Yuki, for his part, just laughed it off.
"I was just imitating what I saw in this video game I played," he said.
Though, of course, you can do anything you want in a game.
You can have monsters that say, "I'm not a bad slime," or even have them join your party.
He was always a joker like that.
Monsters becoming your friends?
That sort of thing could happen only in your dreams.
The world I was born in had almost been razed to the ground by war.
Had it recovered to the point where it could create people like him, people who never seemed to have a care in the world?
He explained to me that these video games were children's toys that let you experience a full story yourself, so if Japan had recovered enough to give children dreams to play with, it must have become a wonderful place. So I listened to Yuki's stories, thinking to myself about a home I could never go back to. I continued to serve as a support for Yuki after that, advising him from the rear, never appearing in the forefront. The Free Guild continued to grow and became an outfit used by nearly everyone.
It embraced a philosophy of rescuing the weak, accessible to everyone equally.
Then Yuki, my very own student, became the guild's Grand Master, its highest position, the one who organized and oversaw the guild masters of each branch.
Given everything he had done for them, I should have expected it.
His efforts were the catalyst that allowed people to live at peace for a change.
He had done everything he needed to. I felt the satisfaction of a job well done. So I decided, then, to go on a journey. A journey to take care of some regrets. I kept having dreams of the past, back when I was still magic-born. It was getting hard to contain Afrit's will. Perhaps I was approaching the end of my natural life. I knew my mask of magic resistance was still working as well as ever, so the reason seemed obvious.
Once I realized that, I concluded that I had best leave town as soon as possible. I couldn't know when Afrit would finally fall out of control, and I had no idea how my death would affect Afrit himself. Plus, I wanted to retaliate against my demon lord. Just once, I wanted to have my say with him.
So I decided to set off on my journey.
When I told Yuki about my plans, he silently nodded, saying nothing about them. Hopefully he was willing to forgive this one final act of selfishness. Maybe, I thought to myself, this is how the hero felt, too.
I made my way to Bloomond.
Heinz was retired by now, since his son Fuse had taken over the guildmaster's role in his place.
We got to meet up and chat a little about old times. He had a lot to say, which I was glad for.
Remarkably, he reported that Veldora had disappeared.
The guild was conducting a frantic investigation to find the cause.
I don't know too many details, Heinz told me with a snicker. They don't tell an old pensioner like me too much. I can tell it's troubling my son, though.
He must have trusted Fuse well to speak of him like that, I thought.
I had gone on several monster hunting operations together with the boy, and I remembered him doing a fine job supporting me. Now he was out of the front lines and following in his father's managerial footsteps.
He must have inherited all of Heinz's natural talent. Thank you, I said. You've been very kind to me. I shouldn't get in their way. After my polite response, I stood up.
Was Veldora's disappearance meant to be some divine message to us? Either way, I was headed for the forest. You stay safe, too, Shizu. I think there's an expedition leaving here tomorrow, actually, he muttered, almost to himself.
If you're hitting the forest, you might as well join them for a while. He didn't try to stop me. He was always an awkward fellow, and this was how he preferred to show kindness. Ah, Heinz, I should have expected nothing less.
I suppose I'll owe you to the very end, then. You owe me nothing, Shizu.
And no talking about the very end yet. I'd like another look at you sometime. I could feel the warmth behind his words. True. I'll be back. I bowed low and left.
The next day, I managed to run into the expedition Heinz mentioned to me.
It consisted of 3 adventurers, and as he'd told me, they were a bright, inviting group.
I genuinely appreciated joining such kind people for my last journey, though their excessive carelessness did baffle me. There was, to say the least, a lot of trouble along our way through the forest of Jura.
I was impressed, in a way, that they had attained a ranking of B at all.
They had the battle technique such a rank implied, but if I had to sum up everything about their team in a word, it would be nonsensical. Our journey continued on nonetheless, right up until they jammed a sword into a giant ant nest.
I was horrified.
This happened not a moment after I told them it was a bad idea, too.
Never in my life did I imagine they would try something like that.
My flames could have torched those giant ants instantly, I imagine. But by the time I realized how hard it was to control my power, I had already started to feel my body deteriorate. It remained physically young thanks to Ifrit's presence, but as my power over him dwindled, it rapidly began aging. Or, I suppose I should say it went back to the age it should always have been. Would Ifrit be released once my body gave in? Or would he crumble and fall apart with me?
I would have no idea what would happen until it did.
That was why I had set off.
And why I hesitated to pull out my fire. We were lucky enough to be rescued by a passing patrol, saving us from any further trouble. But this patrol was one of the fishiest things I had ever seen.
Being saved by monsters?
Nothing like that had ever happened to me before.
These were hobgoblins riding upon magical wolves.
It would have been one thing if they understood a few broken words of human speech, but these were intelligent creatures, and they had tamed what was clearly a high-level monster species.
This was absolutely the kind of suspicious event this adventuring trio had been sent out to investigate, I thought. My destination, meanwhile, was the castle of the demon Lord Leon. His domain occupied the lands just beyond the forest.
I should have chosen that moment to take my leave of their party. But, I don't know. I suppose I just wanted to see, along with these adventurers, what kind of home these monsters had made for themselves.
It was a strange place indeed, this town our rescuers lived in.
It was no dank lair or stinking, filthy den.
A town was the only way to describe it.
The shock I felt was beyond comprehension.
This wasn't some rude shelter, some glorified hole in a mountain.
It was a proper town, one they had built for themselves from scratch. It was under construction, I should probably add.
It had been surveyed and laid out, and building materials had been placed in each section, ready to be converted into houses.
There were no buildings yet, the monsters were still living out of neat rows of tents.
But they had even started their work by focusing on the underground infrastructure.
I had never heard of anything like it on this planet. It was a bizarre settlement. But it was bursting with energy.
The residents, despite being monsters, truly seemed to enjoy working on it. Most of them were hobgoblins, but they seemed to share their lands with the black direwolves. A tad different from the ones I was familiar with, and I didn't think it was my imagination.
The leader of the hobgoblins spoke very fluently to me. I imagine he was the most intelligent among them. He even prepared food for us.
Remarkably, though, he turned out not to be the leader at all. Instead, he was joined by a slime, one who lay back in his lofty throne, acting as if he were king of the world. It might be odd to say a slime could lie back on anything, perhaps, but that really was the sense he exuded. This slime was the strangest thing of all, for he, in fact, was the leader of all these monsters.
It was hilarious.
I couldn't help but do a spit take as he spoke.
"I'm not a bad slime" was how he chose to describe himself.
Just like Yuki's video game.
I began to wonder whether it was a coincidence.
Still, there was something inviting about the space this slime created. The strange creature somehow made me recall memories of my own hometown.
My heart felt full.
Now I was glad I'd decided to step away from my intended path.
This meeting, I thought, was fate at work. And yet, the hours we spent enjoying ourselves came to a sudden halt. My life was about to expire. I had yet to reach my destination, to fulfill my goal, but here it was. Ifrit had been waiting for this moment. I could feel his will taking over mine. It's happening.
I'm going to ruin all of this, too.
If only, one last time, I could just. The Titan manifested himself, all but laughing at my folly. My consciousness faded away. I went to see how she was. She didn't have long. In fact, she might never regain consciousness.
Still, I wanted to take care of her to the end, this fellow otherworlder human. The wounded adventurers all pulled through, thankfully, whining incessantly about how it'd take more than hazard pay to atone for getting burned half to death. "Hey, what's the deal with this?"
Ellen asked. "I don't see any burn scars or anything."
"Like, my skin's as soft and shiny as a baby."
"Dang," Cabal added.
"I didn't think I'd be able to move for another week or so, too." "Yeah, count me surprised. That's some potion he had there."
They were right. That potion had made all of them good as new.
"You know, though. This probably means they'll turn down our request for hazard pay, doesn't it?"
Ellen moaned. "Yep. Nobody's gonna believe us," Cabal replied.
"Yeah, I suppose so. Beats being laid up for good, though," Guido commented.
It never took long for this trio to start bickering with one another over their own self-interested quibbles.
I wondered if they ever really had a thought about anybody besides themselves. They didn't have anything against monsters, at least. "You know," I suggested, "once things calm down a little, maybe I could go visit your town." "Oh, if that's the case, I could give the guild master a message for you."
Just what I wanted to hear.
Cabal had made my day. I looked up to adventurers, kind of. I didn't have any sort of ID papers, though, and I didn't even know whether they'd let monsters join the registry, but it could be fun. So Cabal promised me that I could just say the name Rimuru and the guild master would hear about it soon enough. Nice guy. I was in such high spirits that I decided to give them a farewell gift, a few pieces of equipment, freshly made by the Dwarven brothers.
They were all test models, made with materials they had procured themselves, but the quality was respectable.
Spider robe, a robe of pure white, woven with spider silk. Scale mail, heavy armor made from the shell of a lizard. Far lighter than appearances indicate. Hard leather armor, made from the skins of local monsters.
Magical resistance included.
I also tossed in some food and 10 recovery potions for good measure. Ooh.
Look at this robe.
It's so light, and I can't believe how sturdy it is. And pretty, too.
Whoa.
I've always wanted some real scale mail.
This.
Wait a second, did Master Garm make this?
This'll be like a family treasure to me.
Yeah, are you sure we can have these? This is almost too nice for the likes of me, I mean, real direwolf fur?
It was a miniature celebration for a little while.
But, I mean, the fire had torched all their equipment, and I doubted their salary would let them replace it all that easily.
It wasn't exactly my fault, but I had to feel a little sympathy for them.
The equipment was all prototypes, crafted before the dwarves could move on to mass production, but it was decent enough.
Besides, look how happy they are. I was confident they'd remember to pass my name on. They were calling me boss with the rest of them, too.
The three of them had their qualms about what happened to Shizu, but not enough to keep them from setting off again after 3 days of rest.
They had a report to file and a looming deadline.
If anything, 3 days was a generous amount of time to worry over a woman who'd essentially shoehorned herself into their traveling party uninvited. Still, I promised them all that I'd take care of her, and that was enough to put their minds at ease. A week passed before Shizu woke up again.
Is this?
Oh.
I apologize. Despite the transformation, she still retained all her memories. I was dreaming, she told me. Dreaming about the past. The city I lived in. A place I can never return to.
Japan?
Tell me, slime. What is your name?
Maybe her suddenly elderliness was affecting her memory after all.
I knew I had introduced myself in her presence.
Rimuru, Mom, I replied. Shizu closed her eyes, as if thinking over something.
Could you maybe tell me your real name? She said. She must have known all along. I hesitated for a moment.
Humph, I offered.
You aren't long for this world anyway. I'll tell you.
It's Satoru Mikami.
My real name. A name I figured I wouldn't be using again. Ah. From my land, are you? I had thought you might be. I sensed it from you. She fell silent for a moment. I had heard from my students, as well. The city's much better now.
Prettier?
The last time I was there was nothing but fire all around me.
Yeah.
I could show you, if you'd like. I used thought communication to do exactly that. Fairly useful thing to have at a time like this. I liked it. Ah. The sight made Shizu shed a tear. Listen, slime, or I should say Satoru, I suppose. I have a request for you. Would you mind listening to it? What kind of request?
Nothing particularly doable, I was sure.
But I did promise to take care of her to the end. She deserved to be heard out. I want you to eat me.
What did this old lady just say?
You consumed the curse that was placed on me, did you not? I'm so glad to be rid of it. Her voice grew quiet.
I wish I had the chance. I doubt I could have ever done it, but I wish I could have had the chance to confront the person who placed it on me, one more time.
So I have just one request for you. Would you let me sleep inside you?
Something about her eyes, the resolve that she just couldn't relinquish, grabbed at me.
It seemed so absurd, so cruel. I have to tell you, I have nothing but spite for this world. But I couldn't bring myself to hate it. Still, it's the same as how I feel toward that man. Perhaps I can't help but think of him when I look around me. That's why I don't want to be taken into the earth here. So please. I was hoping you could eat me instead. Well, that's easy enough.
Fulfilling her request would bind me, no doubt, and give me a curse of my own.
I would be charged with taking on her despair and hatred.
Was there any need to waver on that, though? If I wanted her to see the afterlife with her mind at peace, the answer was obvious.
All right. I'll be happy to take on your feelings. And what was the name of this man, the one who hurt you?
At the question, Shizu opened her eyes, scrunched up her burn-scarred face, and shed a few more tears.
Leon Cromwell, she said.
One of the strongest demon lords.
She looked at me with pleading eyes. I promise. I declared.
By my name as Satoru Mikami, or Rimuru Tempest, or whatever works best for you, I promise I'll make Leon Cromwell know everything you feel about him.
I'll make him regret every moment.
Thank you, she whispered, and then she closed her eyes, her breath turning shallow as she slept. Use unique skill predator? Yes.
No. Here's hoping you'll find some peace inside me, then.
Yes, I thought to myself, in a sort of prayer to her, a hope that her dreams inside would remain happy forever.
With no more rude awakenings.
Tap, 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 tap.
She looked up, her face bearing the innocence of youth. Relief spread across it as a smile emerged on her face. Well, there you are.
Don't leave me alone like that again, all right?
But the figure shook its head before pointing at something far away. The girl turned toward it, her expression suddenly clouded with doubtful sadness. There she found
Mom. A burst of happiness rushed through her entire body as she rushed toward her mother. The figure watched her trot off for a moment, then disappeared, as if nothing had ever occupied the space at all.
Perhaps it was just an illusion crafted by the girl's memories. Thus, the girl was reunited with her mother. It marked the end of what had been a long, long journey. Final chapter. The inherited form.
Shizu was gone now, gone, after giving me one final goal to strive for.
Up to now, I had largely taken things as they'd arrived, fighting to keep my head above water.
Now, though, I had a motivation to gather some intel on this demon lord guy.
It was a job I readily accepted, but it was also a promise. And I'm a man who keeps his promises. Besides, I wasn't empty-handed.
She left me with a few new abilities, the unique skill Deviant and the extra skill Control Flame. Oh, right. I ate a Freet, too, didn't I?
He wasn't much of a match for me, but it turned out he was a tough character, rated beyond an A, in fact.
No way some snake or wolf could handle him, to be sure, given that none of their attacks could even faze him.
It took a lot to make it past an A, and now I could see why. There was still a lot of research to be done on my abilities, but before that,
there was something even more important I needed to check up on.
That's right, transforming into an actual person.
I ventured inside the new tent the hobgobs had set up for me, making doubly sure to have all visitors turned away before I closed the door.
Ha ha ha.
Ha ha.
Ah ha 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 ha.
3 levels of laughing, and then
transform.
It wasn't accompanied by any cool sound effects, but I executed mimic, human on myself nonetheless.
But
huh? Whoa, whoa, whoa.
There was none of the usual black smoke I was expecting. What the heck?
I thought, as I realized that my field of vision was only a little higher than usual. I had grown arms and legs, and my usual light blue shade had morphed into a flesh tone.
I wasn't sure what had happened, but something told me it wasn't what I had planned. I didn't have a mirror on hand, which was a pain. But
I kinda didn't want to admit it, but I actually was familiar with this form after all. It was from a long time ago, maybe 30 years or so. This was how the world looked to me back when I was still bumbling around in elementary school. Hang on a second, I was too excited to notice at first, but there was one key difference.
It wasn't there. My should have been newly born manhood, that is, which I was expecting to see down below.
It wasn't there.
What the hell? I internally shuddered as I took another close look at my crotch. It only confirmed the worst. It was smooth as the hypothetical baby's bottom. Thinking back, this wasn't something I had bothered to check up on when transforming into other monster types. But I supposed it made sense.
If I never had to eliminate waste from my body, what use would I have for the associated organs? And if I didn't need to reproduce, I was still fuzzy on that, but if I didn't, then why bother with genitals at all? That was just who I was now, was all.
It was strangely convincing, even as it drove me into a deep sense of mourning.
Suddenly, I was taken by an urge to touch the top of my head. I felt soft hair up there.
It made me breathe a sigh of relief.
At least I wasn't shaped like a space alien.
That's a step forward.
And, come to think of it, I was a giant ball of fur in wolf form.
I don't even want to imagine what that'd look like without hair. Nope. That's a dangerous line of thought.
Really, though, I thought I'd keep a cooler head than this.
Why was I letting myself get in such a panic? I just have to accept the truth about what happened down there. It was hard to swallow, but at least I wasn't a slime any longer.
Too bad I can't check up on my whole body, I thought. What about the replication skill I just picked up from Ifrit?
Seemed like a nice idea.
Good job, me. I didn't know if it'd work, but it was worth a shot. Black mist darted out of my body, forming a human figure in front of me.
Looked like it was a success, after all. It was completed in an instant, only to reveal.
Oh, crap.
Bad news.
First off, my appearance. The hair was a silvery grey with a light tinge of blue to it, topping off a pair of wide-open eyes and a charming, young. Feminine? Masculine? The lack of genitals made it fairly irrelevant, but in terms of appearance, I looked closer to a girl than a boy. This was probably thanks to Shizu. There were no features that I could identify as my own. But it wasn't a perfect recreation of Shizu's genes, either. The hair color was one thing, but the golden eyes were quite another. Veldora had gold eyes, too, which was a common trait among the higher monsters, perhaps. And hang on, didn't Ranga's eyes go from a blood red to gold as well?
Although they also changed depending on his excitement level.
Still, maybe they changed because of my influence on him as his name giver. Either way, nothing about this form was from me. In this world, the only thing that was truly mine was my soul, it seemed. This was mostly Shizu, and man, she must have been one darling little girl. My skin was tremendously smooth, too, with none of the rubbery bounciness of my slime form.
So this cute girl was just standing there in front of me, butt naked.
Not that there was anything that really required hiding, but it still presented certain ethical issues.
If the police existed here, which they didn't, I'd be in serious trouble, but that face was cute. I had to hand it to Shizu. She was blessed with a lot of gifts.
I wasn't too hideous when I was young, either, but nobody would ever describe me as beautiful, no matter how much I padded my memories. I really have to thank her, I thought to myself as I wrapped a blanket around my body, taking the time to hand one to my doppelganger. Now I really needed to figure out some clothing. Right. Back to the main topic, the real reason I thought oh, crap at first.
That all came down to this human form's abilities.
Something I hadn't considered with this replica of mine before actually conjuring it was that my enhanced thought processes allowed me a complete, real-time link with my copy. It and I were both me in a way, there were no appreciable differences between us. If anything, Ifrit's replication skills couldn't hold a candle to mine, his copies were clearly imitations, but mine wasn't at all.
All right. Almost not at all.
One big difference was my copy's capacity for magicules. It held only whatever I cast upon it when creating it, although I was free to install more inside if I wanted to. I had a fair amount of magic to work with, so depending on the application, I could probably do a lot with it. The other issue was that, while Ifrit could generate 10 or so copies without breaking a sweat, my replication skills were so intricate and detail-oriented that a single copy was the best I could manage. Still, I could make a copy of myself with all the same attack and defense abilities.
Any foe who ran into this skill would think I was cheating.
The third and final oh, crap reason, the way it seemed so breezily natural to me, taking this form.
That was something I noticed when I realized no dark mist had surrounded my body. Take my black wolf form, for instance.
I definitely used the mist to create that form, although it made for weaker results compared to my slime self. It was hard to notice thanks to the limited movement available to a form without limbs, but a slime's cells were powerful things, each one could serve as a muscle cell or a brain cell or a nerve cell. See the streamlining effect this makes? Seeing things with the eyes, relaying the information to the nervous system, bringing it to the brain, I could skip all of that. Even without the sage's upgrading effects, my reaction speed was far above the average person's. Transforming with the black mist, however, created a slight time lag between thinking something and moving my body in reaction to it. That, I figured, was what made the replication inferior, if anything, to the real thing. As for this mist-free human transformation, you guessed it, it had the exact same reaction speed as my regular slime form.
No wonder it felt so natural. Having limbs also improved my mobility immensely.
Even in child form, it was so much easier to get around than as a slime, although it tired me out more quickly. The biggest thing, though, was that the lack of black mist usage meant turning human cost me 0 magic.
Talk about convenient. I figured I'd be taking this form for most of my future activity. It was time to try something else.
I gave an order to my replica, and it was a totally smooth process, just like moving my own body. Black mist welled around it, and the copy began maturing. A trim figure, long, flowing grey hair, and an androgynous sort of appearance. Perfect. I could then mold this figure to look more feminine or masculine, go all macho, or obese, or in the prime of my life, or elderly. As I soon discovered, I could transform into all kinds of figures, using magic to cover for anything I didn't have, just like with monster transformations.
That might be a good way to give me some more strength as a human. It hurt my reaction times, but the bigger I was, the more powerful it'd make me.
Speed was the most important element of any battle, I knew, but striking a good balance was something I could experiment with in the days to come. And so Satoru Mikami, an average middle-aged man living a perfectly unexceptional life, came to enjoy his unexpected reincarnation as a slime. After acquiring the form and the emotions of a certain woman, he also gained a mission in his new life. And before long, this single slime named Rimuru would play a central role in some of the most tumultuous times this world had ever seen. Side story.
Gobta's Big Adventure. This is a tale from back when Gobta was just another goblin in the Horde.
The sky stretched blue across the heavens, a refreshing breeze flowing in the air.
And the humans advancing on him like always.
Today, as lively as ever, Gobta was under pursuit. Halt, you. Speed's about the only thing you've got, is it? How dare you vandalize our fields again?
I'm gonna kill you this time. The humans, eyes red with rage, were closing in on Gobta. So he sprinted at full speed. It'd be bad for him, probably, if he let himself get caught. He could only imagine it, since he hadn't been captured yet, but none of his friends had ever come back alive from such an encounter, so all Gobta could do was imagine the terrifying results. He could have just kept his hands off the fields and gardens, of course.
But Gobta and the other goblins didn't quite grasp the concept of agriculture.
All they saw was an open field with lots of fruits and vegetables growing in it. It was human territory, and they knew from experience that getting found would lead to a chase, but nothing could overcome their hunger.
So Gobta escaped down a narrow trail beaten into the earth by the local creatures, chewing the sweet flesh of a melon the whole way. The trail was barely visible at all, the sort of thing only a small goblin could successfully navigate. There would be no entry for the larger humans, who could only stop at a distance and lob insults at him instead.
He breathed a sigh of relief at his good thinking.
Finding an escape route's a basic move, it is,
he thought.
Upon arriving back at the village, Gobta found a group of the older goblin elders gathered around and discussing something.
They were joined by a few kobold merchants who were in town.
As I told you, these are too valuable for us to be able to trade elsewhere.
But that means this magical equipment will simply go to waste.
Are you sure you can offer nothing for them?
If they were somewhat smaller, we would be able to wield them ourselves, but… I see.
Indeed, these are too large for us to handle, either. Eavesdropping as he passed by, Gobta figured they were trying to sell some magical something or others to the kobolds. Human equipment, barring short swords and daggers, was too large for goblins. Armor, too, was out of the question. Clothing made out of things like hard leather could be taken apart and used in piecemeal fashion, but metallic pieces were too much to work with.
None of the goblins had that kind of knowledge.
Magic items were a big unknown. Even touching them, they feared, would break them and make them worthless.
If not even the kobolds wanted them, it was a classic case of pearls before swine.
How about this, then? One kobold suggested to the goblins as they scratched their heads.
If you are willing to travel to the Dwarven Kingdom, they should be able to take these items from you. They would be willing to accept it as payment for Dwarven hardware and the like, and they will gladly deliver your purchases to you as well.
It will be a fair distance from here, mind, but as long as you travel upstream along the river, it is impossible to lose your way.
This led to a clamor among the assembled goblin elders.
The Dwarven Kingdom?
One bellowed. That is an impossible distance. I have only heard rumors of that foreign land. How long would it take to travel to such a distant place?
Yes. And who would embark on the journey? Our young are our most valuable workers, we cannot afford to spare a single one.
Nothing I need to worry about,
Gobta thought as he blithely ambled by, paying little attention to the seemingly never-ending bickering.
Fate had different plans.
Hold on, the village elder said, stopping him.
You look like you have little occupying your time.
Could I ask a favor?
Gobta immediately froze. Something told him this favor wouldn't be much to his liking. Look at this knife, the elder continued.
Don't you think it's a wonderful piece?
If you do this favor for us, I'll be happy to give it to you. The gleam of the blade was more than enough to grab Gobta's attention. Say what you will, sir. I'll handle whatever you need, he blurted, immediately forgetting his earlier sense of foreboding, but perhaps that was unavoidable. The silvery gleam on this knife was the product of the magic imbued inside. It immediately robbed Gobta of the ability to engage in critical thought. His mouth had moved before his brain did.
Ah.
But it was already too late.
You will, then?
You will travel to the Dwarven Kingdom for us?
Huh? Me?
May we count on you for this?
Now the elders surrounded Gobta, identical smiles on their faces. The sight of their stern eyes above their upturned lips forced Gobta to nod meekly in response.
It was said that the average goblin's lifespan was no more than a fifth of a human's.
Their lineage could be traced back to the ancient fairy-affiliated races, allegedly, but given their current degenerate monster selves, it was a tenuous link at best.
Even the longest-lived were lucky to see their 20th birthday, and most racked up only a decade or so before shuffling off.
The age of 3, when goblins were ready for reproductive activity, was seen as the start of their adulthood, with full maturity at age 5. They were not very strong creatures, and as a result, their species made up the difference through explosive numbers of offspring. Relatively few survived to adulthood, however, making the cruelty of nature all the more obvious. Only about half of all goblin children reached full maturity, and of those, less than half ever saw that 5th birthday. It was simply the lot they were given, and considering these short lives, goblins did not have the habit of acquiring language skills.
They could speak words, yes, but this was done strictly to communicate their intentions to each other and nothing more.
There was no concept of gaining knowledge and imparting it to the next generation, nor any habit of stockpiling resources to improve their living conditions. This was exactly why the goblins saw no use for magical items apart from selling them in exchange for their daily needs, along with any decent armor they could get their grubby paws on. The lack of intelligence among even the elders meant that they truly had no idea what a journey to the Dwarven Kingdom would entail. The round trip would take several months, a hefty part of a goblin's lifespan, and he would have to risk everything he held dear.
Yet nobody in the goblin village considered it to be a terribly important mission.
To the elders and other mature adults, they were simply taking a rough-sounding assignment and giving it to a child with nothing better to do. They held no ill will toward him, nor, really, the arithmetic skills needed to appreciate the scope of this quest.
It was just how it was.
And so, with only a few moments of hesitation, Gobta's journey to the Dwarven Kingdom was set in stone. Why is everyone so mean?
Gobta whined to himself. He had a valid point.
He was a goblin child, still not fully grown, and they were strapping a load the size of a mountain on his back and sending him off on some grand quest. He had heard from the kobolds that it'd be a 2-month walk by itself, but with all this baggage?
It was hard even putting one foot in front of the other. But no point complaining about it, Gobta started to think. Then he had an idea.
Why don't I put all this junk in a box and pull it behind me? This, unfortunately, didn't work.
The box refused to move. Gobta scratched his head some more.
Then he remembered the really big box he saw once, near a human settlement, with a horse pulling it around. Oh yeah, that one had some round things on it, didn't it?
What he was remembering was a cart, and the round things were wheels, although he didn't have the words for them in his vocabulary.
So Gobta foraged around for something that would work in their place.
What he found was a pair of abandoned circular shields. This ought to do it. Things proceeded commendably quickly from there.
He took a straight club, then used his shiny new magical knife to whittle it down to size. Then he put a couple of holes in the box with his belongings and ran the stick through the both of them. He jammed the twin shields onto both ends of this makeshift axle and bound them in place with some handy vines he'd found, a couple extra pieces of wood for handles, and voila, an instant pull wagon. With a few rags piled on top to keep things from falling off, and a few more from the village to keep warm in the evenings, he was set. The elder was kind enough to provide some food and water, too.
So Gobta left the village.
Long, sentimental goodbyes were never really the goblin's style anyway.
I'm hungry.
A week later, Gobta was staggering forward in a state of near total exhaustion.
The food on his wagon, which he'd sort of assumed would last him the rest of his life, had disappeared by day 5.
There was still some water left, but not much, probably. The wagon, meanwhile, kept getting stuck on tree roots and such, sapping Gobta's strength. Traversing on foot with his energy running low, Gobta and his journey were in jeopardy.
He had now walked for 2 days without any food.
As his steps grew increasingly unsteady, Gobta struggled to pull his wagon along, but
I can't. He plopped down at the base of a large tree on the side of the path.
In an amazing stroke of luck, the moment he settled down, he spotted a mushroom sprouting up from the ground. If he had examined it for a little longer, he probably would have noticed its tremendously poisonous-looking color, but the hunger was starting to cloud his vision. Ooh, a mushroom.
I could fight for 3 years with this.
He lunged at the mushroom, wolfing it down raw without much of a second thought. Yet again, though, Gobta's sheer luck saved the day. The particular type of mushroom he chose was dangerously poisonous, but only if heat was applied to it, grilling, boiling, whatever. The juices of its meat would then transform into a lethal compound, something Gobta had no idea about as he inadvertently chose the safest way to enjoy it.
Having a full stomach did wonders for Gobta's spirits.
He filled his leather skin from a pool of water inside a cavity in the tree, then decided to take a rest, not too interested in traveling any farther that day. His wagon was set to break apart at any moment, but luckily there were some useful vines nearby he used to lash it back together, as well as some handy sap from the tree to fill in the assorted holes and crevices that had appeared. The bark from the tree did wonders to patch up the largest breaks in the box, too.
With that vital work complete, Gobta slept the rest of the night, relieving his fatigue.
He woke up the next morning, surprisingly chipper considering how yesterday had gone, and began foraging, picking up some edible-looking nuts and wild strawberries, and spotting some more of the mushrooms from the previous day.
I've never seen such a dangerous-looking mushroom, he exclaimed to himself. Not even I could eat something like that.
So he left them behind, picking a duller-looking mushroom to take along in his pocket. Given all the brightly colored, poisonous-looking mushrooms in the area, he figured, in his hazy memory, that this must have been the one he'd eaten. Man, was I lucky to find this winner among all the poison ones. So he foraged around a little more before deciding to set off. It was still before morning, and he didn't have the foresight to stockpile food a little more before departing, so instead he slowed down, searching for more edibles along the way. A month after he departed his home village, Gobta finally arrived at the large river he was told to look out for. The flowing water was beautiful and almost totally transparent. The occasional glints of sunlight he spotted within must have been fish, he reasoned. It appeared calm on the surface, probably because it was so wide he couldn't even see the other side, but just a little below, the current looked as if it would give even a decent swimmer a run for their money. The sheer size of the river made Gobta's eyes widen in surprise. He was familiar with creeks and the like, and he loved playing in them, but this was a whole other level of grandness. He had seen nothing like it before. The sight was unimaginable, and it was little wonder that it amazed him. "Hiya! This is so great!" he shouted. The sight of the flowing water never got old to him. He sat there the entire day, just watching it go by, until night fell. The next morning, fully satisfied at the view he had taken in, Gobta set off early. Only when he was about to start walking did he notice an important issue.
Huh? They said to follow my left hand once I reached the river, he whispered, not expecting an answer.
But if I turn around, it's going in the opposite direction.
He was right.
He knew he had put a mark on his left hand so he'd remember which one it was when it came time to tackle that important issue. The only problem, it turned out his left hand would point in different directions whenever he moved. Follow his left hand where?
That was the hard part. In the end, he decided to pick up a tree branch he found at the side of the river, let it fall to the ground, and travel the way it pointed.
The fact that it wound up facing the correct way was another testament to Gobta's astounding luck.
He followed the branch's lead, not doubting it for a moment, and the trip went problem-free from there.
Just when the journey was starting to bore him a little with its simplicity, Gobta saw some shallows in the river up ahead. It was a watering hole for the forest animals nearby, although none of them seemed to be fighting each other. They were avoiding confrontation at this spot, a sort of instinctual, unwritten law of nature, perhaps. Carnivore and herbivore were here together, one of the few places in the wild world where you'd ever see it.
That rule, however, was reserved for the animal kingdom. Humans and monsters didn't adhere to it. Neither did Gobta.
What's more, since most monsters that hunted animals tended to be nocturnal, the animals lowered their guards when it was still light out.
What a chance! My first meet in ages. Gobta's eyes began twinkling as he watched the creatures.
Large, slow animals enjoyed the feeling of water on their backs. Nimbler predators took a drink and quickly left the premises. There were even smaller birds and hares and such, drinking on the far edges to avoid the others. His eyes swam as he took in all the options. Then he found a wild hare, a slower-looking one, fat and juicy to his eyes.
The perfect size for someone like Gobta. Anything larger would have been too dangerous.
Approaching his target, Gobta stopped after a short distance and carefully observed his surroundings.
All right. So far, so good. He grinned to himself, slowly closing in as he gathered a few stones from the ground. In a moment, he was within what he felt was comfortable throwing range.
His stealth skills, honed by a long career of raiding vegetable gardens, paid off for him. Yeah.
Brimming with confidence, Gobta launched a stone at the hare.
His unerring aim gave him a clean hit, and the animal fell into the watering hole.
The others around it immediately darted off. Gobta didn't care. He was already salivating by the time he picked up the body. Then, a problem occurred.
Grrrr.
With a mighty wail, a magical beast appeared from between the trees.
It was standing majestically atop a small cliff, and slowly its eyes turned toward Gobta.
This was a blade tiger, the so-called king of this dense forest.
It enjoyed a rank of B, pretty well ensuring that an F-ranked goblin stood no chance. This beast was here for the animals around the watering hole, just like Gobta was, but thanks to Gobta taking action first, all the animals had scattered, leaving the blade tiger with nothing.
Nothing, that is, except Gobta himself. And his catch, of course, but that wouldn't be nearly enough to sate this monster. Are you after me?
The blade tiger leapt from its perch, unfazed by the height of the cliff, and landed in front of Gobta without a sound.
It made him flinch, but his instincts told him that running was pointless.
As it was, there was no escaping a fate that ended in the tiger's maw.
What should he do? Gobta thought as hard as he could. Then, if this is how it is, I'll have to struggle as much as I can.
Steeling himself, Gobta readied himself against the blade tiger.
There weren't many options at his disposal.
His left hand still had a stone in it, but against a blade tiger, that wouldn't accomplish much.
Maybe that would work. He suddenly recalled the knife given to him before his departure.
Maybe it could wound the creature? And maybe, if he was lucky, that'd buy him enough time to escape.
Once he made that conclusion, there was no time to waste.
There was nothing else at his disposal, so he decided to believe in his chances and keep resisting until the end. First, Gobta lobbed the stone. The knife was his real ticket out of here, But if the tiger dodged it, he was dead.
So he used the stone first to distract the beast.
The blade tiger easily leapt out of its way, and Gobta, anticipating where his adversary would land, removed the knife from his pocket and prepared to hurl it toward. This is a mushroom? It took a few moments for him to realize that it was no knife he was about to throw at the blade tiger.
But he was already in motion, unable to stop, and away the mushroom went. He was kind of planning to eat that later.
The one dull-colored mushroom he could find in a grove full of poisonous ones.
He'd meant it for a snack and then promptly forgotten about it. But then something beyond Gobta's imagination took place.
It turned out that this mushroom was a rare poisonous type, one containing spores that were loaded with lethal venom. Gobta had been walking around with that in his pocket the whole time, and then he'd thrown it at a magical beast. The blade tiger glanced at the mushroom hurtling toward its face, then opened its mouth. It used its voice cannon skill in an attempt to vaporize it, which proved to be a mistake. The pulverized mushroom immediately released all its spores, which floated on the breeze and landed all over the tiger's body. It fell to the ground, twitching, racked from head to toe with pain. The spores had entered its eyes, ears, and mouth and were relentlessly punishing its senses. For the first time since birth, the blade tiger was experiencing a truly indescribable level of pain.
Gobta wasn't very smart, but he was smart enough to take advantage of the situation. Whoa! I don't know what happened, but this is my big chance. A greater adventurer would have closed in to stab the final blow.
Not Gobta. Quickly, he planned his escape, making sure to pick up his hair before he left. Reaching his battered old wagon, he tossed the bunny corpse on top of the load and ran away at full speed.
He kept going as long as his breath would let him, until he finally made it to what seemed to be a safe place.
He breathed a sigh of relief, having escaped what had been the greatest danger ever to occur in his life.
Being freed from certain death immediately reminded Gobta that he was hungry. He recalled the hair in his possession, but not even he was simple enough to let his guard down here.
He decided to move over to the riverbed, which would give him a good view of his entire surroundings, and used some stones and dead sticks to fashion a serviceable outdoor stove. The danger of the past few moments was now firmly behind him as Gobta's thoughts turned to his appetite. He drained the carcass of blood, bristling with anticipation, and skinned and gutted the animal. Before long, it was arranged on a stick atop the fire. Now all he had to do was rotate the stick around and make sure the surface was fully cooked. It was a simple recipe, combined with some berry juice squeezed over the carcass, and it took only a few moments to wrap up.
This is great. This is so great. Gobta chewed on the meat, not minding the oils dripping down on him. There was nothing more delicious than the first meal after staring death in the face.
In Gobta's case, after living off wild strawberries and assorted nuts for the past X number of days, the first meat he could remember tasted as though he had ascended to heaven.
Nothing could have made him happier.
As far as he was concerned, the fear he'd felt before the blade tiger was all in the past.
His brain had already processed it as just another incident in his life. It was the first time Gobta had gotten to eat his fill in a while. This he did, with gusto.
Right,
he said. I have a feeling tomorrow's gonna be a great day. To Gobta, the past might as well have been a faraway oblivion. All that really mattered was the next day. The blade tiger run-in turned out to be the last major trouble Gobta encountered for the next month of traveling. The hazy mountains that had seemed so far away long ago now loomed so large that the peaks were no longer visible, even if he looked straight up. The buttes above him had been weathered down by the rain to fall